I am not sharing this story for pity. I'm sharing it because almost every year, a lot of children are being abandoned for one reason or the other. Some are in the orphanage living in tears and sorrow because they are not being given the love and treatment they deserve. They miss their parents every day of their life. And many of them do not even have idea what their parent looks like. Some lost their parents, and also most of them without parents are in the street. Some begs before they could eat. Man, this is not just about me. It is also about all the children going through situations like this in one way or the other.
From the very beginning of my life, I carried a wound that I did not cause. I was told I came into this world not in the warm embrace of a mother, nor in the proud arms of a father, but wrapped in an old piece of cloth and left on the cold steps of an orphanage gate. That is how my story began. I never saw the face of the woman who gave me life. I never heard the voice of the man who fathered me. All I had was a date on a record, a name chosen by strangers, and a childhood that often felt like I was not supposed to come to this world. My name is Daniel, and I'm 27. Life in the orphanage was not a fairy tale. People like to paint pictures of children living happily together, laughing and sharing, but the truth was very different. Every morning, we woke up to the sound of a bell, and every night, we went to bed with the ache of missing something we couldn't name. Some children came in crying for their parents, clutching small bags or toys they brought from home before life turned cruel. Others, like me, had nothing, not even a memory. I envied the ones who could remember. Even if their parents had abandoned them, at least they knew a face, a voice, a touch. I had none of that. All I had was emptiness. As the years passed, I learned the rhythm of the orphanage. The caregivers tried their best, but no matter how hard they tried, they were not our parents. They could feed us, bathe us, and teach us, but they could not give us the kind of love that comes from blood. I remember nights when I would lie awake, listening to the soft cries of other children in the dark. Sometimes I cried too, but quietly, because I hated looking weak. I would stare at the ceiling and whisper questions into the silence. Who am I? Where did I come from? Why didn't anyone want me? The ceiling never answered. One of the hardest things was adoption day. That was the day when couples walked into the orphanage, holding hands and smiling, searching for a child to complete their family. We children would line up like we were on display, wearing our best clothes, trying to look happy and well-behaved. I always hoped someone would choose me. I would stand taller, smile wider, pray harder. But time after time, they would pick someone else. The cute little girl with big eyes, the baby boy who could barely walk, the quiet child who clung to their leg, and I was left behind. Each time, it felt like being abandoned all over again. Each time, the question grew louder inside me. What is wrong with me? By the time I turned 12, I had lost count of how many children left while I stayed behind. I began to build walls around my heart. I told myself I didn't care. I pretended I didn't want to be chosen. I became the boy who joked too much, who acted tough, who laughed loudly to cover the ache. But deep inside, I cared more than anyone knew. At night, when no one was looking, I pressed my face into the pillow and wept silently, wondering why even the people who gave me life didn't want me.
If you are still watching to this stage, please do well to subscribe to our channel, like and share to your friends and family. This might be what they need. And most importantly, hit the notification bell below so that you can be notified whenever we drop a new episode of You Are Not Alone.
There was one caregiver, Miss Grace, who saw through my mask. She often told me, "Daniel, you are special. Don't ever think you are less because no one has adopted you." I would nod and smile, but I never truly believed her. How could I be special if my own mother abandoned me like a piece of trash? Miss Grace once gave me a small wooden cross and told me to keep it close whenever I felt alone. I still remember how she pressed it into my hand and said, "One day, you will understand why your story began this way. Until then, hold on." At the time, I didn't understand, but I kept that cross like a secret treasure. It was the only thing in my life that felt like it belonged to me. Teenage years in the orphanage were the hardest. While younger children often got the attention of potential parents, teenagers were mostly ignored. Nobody wanted a boy who was already tall, with a voice that was breaking and an attitude shaped by years of pain. I became invisible. My friends were being taken away, one after another, and I remained. I began to wonder if I would ever leave. I told myself that maybe I was meant to be alone forever. Maybe I would never know what it felt like to have someone call me son. I remember one rainy evening when I sat by the window, watching drops slide down the glass. Outside, I saw a family walking with their umbrellas, the little boy between them laughing as his parents swung him by the arms. My chest ached so badly that I pressed my hand against it, as if I could hold myself together. That night, I made a silent vow. If no one ever came for me, I would go out into the world and find out for myself who I was. When I turned 16, the orphanage organized a small birthday celebration for me. The children sang, and Miss Grace baked a cake with my name written in icing. For a few hours, I felt like I mattered. But the happiness faded quickly when I overheard two staff members talking later that night. "It's a shame," one said. "It's been here since he was a baby. At his age, it's unlikely anyone will adopt him now." The words pierced me like knives. They didn't know I was listening. They didn't see me clutching the small wooden cross in my hand, whispering to myself, why was I even born? At 18, I aged out of the orphanage. That meant I could no longer stay there. I was given a small bag with my clothes, a little money, and a file with the only record of my life, a single page stating I had been abandoned on a certain day, wrapped in cloth, with no note, no name, no clue about my parents. That was my entire history, on one piece of paper. Nothing more. Stepping out of the orphanage gates for the last time was terrifying. I looked back at the building where I had spent all my life, a place that was both home and prison. My heart pounded with fear. The world outside was huge and unknown, and I had no family waiting for me, no one to call. But I also felt something else, determination. I whispered to myself, Daniel, you are on your own now. You either survive or you disappear. The first weeks were brutal. I tried to find work, but with no experience and no one to recommend me, doors slammed in my face. I slept in cheap hostels and sometimes on the streets when I had no money. Hunger became a constant companion. I would walk past restaurants, smelling food I couldn't afford, and my stomach would twist with pain. There were nights I went to bed with nothing but water. Despite everything, I refused to give up. I found small jobs, carrying loads for traders, washing cars, sweeping shops. I did whatever I could to survive. But survival wasn't enough. Deep inside, the question still haunted me. Who were my parents? Why did they abandon me? Were they alive? Did they ever think about me? Every stranger's face made me wonder if they were connected to me. Every woman of a certain age made me ask, could she be my mother? One evening, after finishing a long day of carrying loads at the market, I returned to the small room I rented with my last coins. I opened the file from the orphanage and stared again at the single page that held my life. That's when I noticed something I had overlooked before. A faint note scribbled in the corner.
I woke that morning with a restless energy I had never felt before. The city outside my window hummed with life, the vendors shouting their wares, the traffic rattling along the streets, the distant laughter of children playing on uneven sidewalks. But all I heard was the pounding of my own heartbeat. Today, I told myself, I would begin the search in earnest. No more waiting, no more hoping that someone else would offer answers. The only way I would find the truth about my parents was to chase it myself. I started where any abandoned record begins, the orphanage. I returned to the office, carrying my single sheet of paper like a talisman. The administrative files were dense, yellowed with age, but meticulously organized. I asked the clerk for access to old adoption files, hospital records, anything that might give me a lead. She eyed me skeptically at first, likely thinking I was wasting my time. But after seeing my persistence, she retrieved a small box of papers from the archives, dust motes swirling in the air as she opened it. Hours were spent leafing through birth certificates, old intake forms, and adoption records. I was looking for names, addresses, anything that connected to the day I was abandoned. One small notation caught my eye, a handwritten comment on a hospital intake sheet. Mother unknown, possibly left under duress. No note provided. My stomach twisted. This was the first acknowledgement that my arrival wasn't entirely by choice. A trace, faint as it was, of the circumstances surrounding my birth. Encouraged, I decided my next step had to be the hospital itself. I made my way through winding streets, navigating the crowded city with a mix of urgency and trepidation. The hospital was imposing, its tall facade a sharp contrast to the crowded neighborhood outside. I spoke to the records department, explaining that I was searching for my birth certificate and any information about my mother. They were polite but firm. Policies were strict, they said, citing privacy laws. They could not release the documents directly, but they offered to verify information if I could provide a valid form of identification. I left the hospital feeling a mix of frustration and determination. I had no official identification beyond the paper from the orphanage, but I realized I could request a certified copy of my birth certificate, which would at least confirm the hospital details and potentially lead to my mother's name. That evening, back in my small rented room, I drafted letters and forms, carefully filling in every detail I knew. My hands shook as I wrote my name, my date of birth, and the scant information about the abandonment. I felt like I was laying the first bricks of a bridge to a life I had never known. Days stretched into weeks as I navigated bureaucratic hurdles. Offices demanded fees I barely had, and clerks seemed indifferent to my urgency. I slept less, ate less, and spent more time walking the streets, retracing every path the papers hinted at. The neighborhood around the hospital was different from my childhood streets. It smelled of diesel, grilled food, and wet asphalt. I spoke to taxi drivers, street vendors, and security guards, asking vaguely about families who had come to the hospital long ago. Most dismissed me. Some laughed. A few offered vague hints. There was a woman who came often. Yes, long ago. Nobody knew much. One afternoon, while waiting near the hospital gates, a woman selling snacks caught my attention. She looked to be in her late 50s, with eyes that had seen far too much of the world. On impulse, I asked if she remembered mothers who had recently abandoned children or visited the orphanage. She studied me, then leaned closer, whispering. There was a young woman, desperate, hiding from someone. She came almost every day asking about her baby. The nurses wouldn't let her see him. She cried a lot. Why do you ask? My pulse quickened. I told her my story cautiously, not wanting to overwhelm her with details, only enough to see if she remembered. She nodded slowly, her eyes misting, then gave me a small scrap of information. A name. Not a full name, just a first name and a neighborhood. It was hardly anything, but it was more than I had ever had. I tucked the name carefully into my pocket, tracing it with my finger over and over, as if speaking it aloud would make the woman real to me. That evening, I visited the neighborhood she mentioned. It was a crowded, bustling area, where the buildings pressed together as if in competition for space. I asked around discreetly, describing the name and the vague details I had been given. Some people shook their heads, some stared suspiciously, and a few seemed to hesitate before directing me to a small clinic tucked between two shops. The receptionist there was sharp-eyed and curt, but eventually allowed me to speak with an older nurse. She paused, and her expression softened when I mentioned the first name. "Yes," she said finally. "I remember her. She was young, scared. She came here several times. I never knew why she left the baby, and she never returned after a few weeks." I scribbled every detail she gave me. A pattern began to form. A young mother, desperate, possibly hiding from someone or something, and a hospital record that ended abruptly. There were no guarantees that she was alive or even that she wanted to be found, but this was the first real thread I had. I spent the next several days digging through public records, talking to neighbors, and visiting clinics and markets in that area. Each conversation was painstakingly slow. People had moved, memories had faded, and many refused to speak of things that happened decades ago. I grew exhausted, often coming home with nothing more than fragments. A rumor here, a distant recollection there. Yet I clung to each piece, stitching them together like a fragile quilt, hoping it would cover the cold emptiness I had carried all my life. One morning, I traced a lead to a small legal office. A man there, older and formal, listened carefully as I explained my quest. He specialized in family law and adoption cases. After some discussion, he offered to help me check court records for any proceedings related to my birth or any guardianship matters. For the first time, I felt a surge of hope. The man didn't promise answers, but he promised action, and that was enough. Weeks of paperwork followed. I scoured court archives, reading transcripts and petitions. Most were unhelpful, vague, or incomplete. But then, buried in a filing cabinet in a dusty office, I found something extraordinary. A petition filed by a woman around the time of my birth requesting anonymity for herself, but showing evidence of a child left at the orphanage. The mother had requested that the child not be disclosed to anyone, and the court had approved it. There was no name, only a signature that was partially legible. I compared it to the fragments I had gathered, the neighborhood, the clinic visits, the first name whispered by the street vendor. It was enough, a starting point. Armed with this new information, I returned to the neighborhood, retracing the steps of the woman I hoped was my mother. I spoke to old neighbors, shopkeepers, and anyone who had lived there decades ago. Some recalled a young woman matching her description, others had moved away. Slowly, a picture emerged, a life that had been difficult, constrained by circumstance, fear, and desperation. She had left the city shortly after my birth, possibly to escape scandal, possibly to start anew. I realized something essential. Even if I found her, there was no guarantee she would want to meet me or that she would remember me. The risk of rejection loomed as heavily as the risk of hope. Still, I pressed on, driven by the need to know, to connect, to understand the void that had defined my life. One evening, after months of searching, a breakthrough came. A local community center director recalled a woman arriving years ago with a young child, asking about adoption services. The name matched the one I had been following for months. The director offered to let me check the sign-in logs from that time. There it was, an exact match of the first name, the approximate age, and the location. I sat in the small office, staring at the log, heart hammering. The pieces of my life, scattered across time and space, were slowly coming together. I had no mother yet, no father yet, only traces, hints, and whispers, but they were enough to guide me. I knew where I had to go next. The following days were a blur of preparation. I mapped the areas I needed to visit, reached out to old neighbors, and retraced the last known locations of the woman who might be my mother. Each step brought anxiety and hope in equal measure. Nights were restless, filled with dreams of confrontation, of reunion, of rejection, and of embrace.
Finally, after weeks of tireless effort, I arrived at the last known address, a modest house on the outskirts of the city. My hands trembled as I approached the gate. I knocked. There was no answer at first. Then a door opened slightly. A woman's voice asked, hesitant and cautious, who I was. I took a deep breath and spoke, carefully, truthfully. My name is Daniel. I was born on this date, left at the orphanage many years ago. I believe you are my mother. The seconds stretched endlessly. I saw the figure move in the doorway, eyes widening in disbelief, recognition, fear, and confusion all at once. She took a step back, then another, and finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Is this really you?" I nodded. Words failed me. The search that had consumed months, the questions that had tormented years of my life, the absence that had haunted every day, finally, it was real. The hunt for truth had led me here, and though I did not yet know what would come next, I knew one thing: the journey was worth every moment of pain. And in that moment, standing on the threshold of the unknown, I realized that the emptiness I had carried all my life might finally begin to be filled. I never thought you would come looking for me. After all these years, I thought you would hate me. I shook my head, emotions threatening to spill over. I don't hate you. I needed to know. I needed to understand why. She took a hesitant step forward, closing the gap slightly. I suppose it's time you knew everything. The truth of why I left you, why I disappeared. It's not easy to say. I nodded. I want to hear it. Her eyes filled with tears, and she motioned for me to follow her into the modest living room. The furniture was simple, worn but clean. There were photographs on the walls, mostly of her alone and some of distant family members I didn't recognize. She gestured to the chair across from her, and I sat, my hands clasped tightly together to keep them from trembling. She inhaled sharply, as if summoning courage from some deep hidden place. I was very young when I became pregnant, at 17. Your father... He wasn't there. He denied it. Completely. He disappeared, refused to take responsibility. I had no one to turn to, Daniel. I was scared, confused, and alone. My parents said I should try to find the man who fathered you and leave the child with him. That if I did not, then I should not come back home with you. Her voice cracked. She paused, covering her face with her hands for a moment, then lowered them slowly. I had no choice. I didn't know where your father was. I had no way of locating him, and I couldn't take care of you on my own. I made the hardest decision of my life. I left you at the orphanage, hoping, praying that you would be safe, that someone would love you when I could not. I felt a lump in my throat. Every nerve in my body was straining between anger, sorrow, and a strange relief. The emptiness I had carried for so long suddenly had context, not justification, but context. She had not abandoned me out of malice, but out of fear, youth, and powerlessness. I understand," I whispered, though the words sounded weak even to my own ears. "I've always wondered, but hearing you say it, I think I can forgive you." Her hands trembled as she reached toward me, almost afraid I would reject her. I didn't move. I let her take my hand. The warmth of her skin, so familiar and yet foreign, made something inside me ache and heal at the same time. "I carried your absence with me every day," she said, voice breaking. "Every time I thought about you, every time I wondered if you were alive, I hated myself for not being able to care for you. I thought you would never forgive me, and maybe you shouldn't. But I had no other choice, Daniel. None at all." I swallowed hard, fighting tears I hadn't allowed myself to shed in years. "I don't blame you. You were a child yourself. You did what you had to do. I've spent my life searching for answers, and now I finally have one." We sat in silence for a long time, neither of us speaking, only the sound of our breathing filling the small room. For the first time in my life, the void that had been inside me, so vast, so constant, felt slightly smaller. The absence of my father was still there, sharp and bitter, but it didn't feel as insurmountable as before. I had my mother now. She was real, present, and willing to let me into her life. Over the next few hours, she told me everything she could remember about those years, how she had struggled with shame and fear, how her parents had pressured her into making an impossible choice, and how she had left me at the orphanage with a prayer on her lips, hoping I would survive and thrive. She spoke of her regrets, the nights that she had cried herself to sleep, and the constant longing she had carried for a child she couldn't raise. As I listened, I felt a mixture of sorrow and relief. Sorrow for the years lost, for the experiences I could never share with her as a child, but relief that the person responsible for my beginning was finally here, human and fallible, not a ghost or a shadow. When she paused, I reached out and held her hands firmly. "I forgive you," I said, my voice steady. "Not because it was easy, but because I choose to. I choose to start over with you. I've carried enough emptiness in my life. I want to try to build something now." Her tears fell freely. She clutched my hands as if she were afraid I might vanish again. "I've dreamed of this moment for years," she whispered. "To hear you say that, to know you forgive me. I don't deserve it, but thank you. Thank you, Daniel." In that moment, something shifted. The years of searching, the nights of loneliness and hunger, the endless questions about who I was, all of it suddenly made sense. Not justification, but meaning. I had survived, and now I could begin to live. We spent the following days together, slowly learning each other's rhythms, speaking about the years we had lost. She told me about her life after leaving me, the struggles she had faced, the jobs she had taken, the places she had moved, always carrying a silent hope that one day I might find her. I shared with her my life in the orphanage, the streets, the jobs, the nights of loneliness, and the dreams that had kept me moving forward. Though the father remained absent, the knowledge of my mother's presence brought a fragile but vital hope. I could imagine a future now, however small, built on the love that had been deferred for so long. I began to see myself not just as the boy left behind, but as a man who had survived, who had endured, and who could now be embraced, even if partially, by the family I had always longed for. Weeks passed. We formed routines, laughed at small jokes, cooked together, and shared quiet meals. Every touch, every word, every glance was a stitch in the fabric of our relationship, repairing the tear left so many years ago. It wasn't perfect. We still stumbled over emotions, memories, and the unspoken grief for time lost. But for the first time, I felt the weight of the past lifting, replaced by something fragile yet persistent: hope. One evening, as we sat by the window, watching the sun sink behind the rooftops, I realized something profound. My mother had not abandoned me out of cruelty. She had acted out of desperation, fear, and youth.
She had made the only choice she could at the time, and now, decades later, she was here, willing to let me be part of her life. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. "It's not perfect," I said softly, "but it's real. And for the first time, it feels like I can belong somewhere." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "We have a lot to catch up on, Daniel, but we have each other now. That's what matters." And in that quiet, sunlit room, I realized that I could finally begin to build a life where the shadow of abandonment was no longer the defining feature.
My father might never be found, might never acknowledge his part, but that absence no longer felt like the end. With my mother by my side, I could start over. I could live, I could forgive, and I could hope. For the first time in 27 years, I allowed myself to imagine a life that was not defined by what I had lost, but by what I had finally found.
I am not sharing this story for pity. I'm sharing it because almost every year, a lot of children are being abandoned for one reason or the other. Some are in the orphanage living in tears and sorrow because they are not being given the love and treatment they deserve. They miss their parents every day of their life. And many of them do not even have idea what their parent looks like. Some lost their parents, and also most of them without parents are in the streets. Some begs before they could eat. I mean, this is not just about me. It is also about all the children going through situations like this in one way or the other. To you watching this, I want to ask you, when last do you visit the orphanage home in your area? If you have not been there before, then this is a reminder that there is a need for you to do so. Go there, show the children some love, put a smile on their face, and let them know that they are not alone.